Welcome, everyone. We'll wait a few more moments because I can see everybody's coming into the room. So good to see you, even though I can't see you, but I know you're here with us. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome, everyone. It's so good to know that you're present, even though I can't see you. But I feel like we're all in a room together. I wish it was at the Four Seasons. And glad that you're all here. Welcome to the second Carol Emmott Foundation Symposium, but the first Christine Malcolm Symposium. It's a tradition now that we're doing it the second time. And last year at Christine's retirement, we honored her by naming this because I think, as all of you who know Christine well, this is something that comes from her brilliance and her ideas and the flow. And I think we've got a really excellent program for you. I'm going to turn it over to Doug now, Doug Riddle, who will serve as our facilitator. And I look forward to enjoying this program with you. Thanks.
Hello, welcome everybody. It gives me a huge amount of pleasure to welcome our founding CEO, Christine Malcolm, to our symposium this afternoon. I suspect that everyone here knows Christine's history, but I'll just mention a couple of things because she's been a remarkable healthcare leader in organizations as varied as the University of Chicago Medical Center, Rush University, Kaiser Permanente, and the Healthcare Group of Computer Sciences Corporation. She still influences organizations all over the country and continues her mission, which I got to experience firsthand in her leadership with us at the Carol Emmott Fellowship and Foundation through her own firm, Salt Creek Advisors. And I love the line that you have, Christine, on your own website, working with leaders on big ideas to make healthcare better. And that characterizes your work so clearly. Since she and Felisa hired me as a curriculum director, I'll just speak to you. You've been a friend, a mentor, and a provocateur who has inspired me, and I think inspires all of us to do better, to make a bigger difference, and to leave no one out. And so I'm especially thrilled, both personally and professionally, to welcome Christine to offer some thoughts, more reflection as we open the inaugural Christine Malcolm Annual Symposium. Christine?
Did it work? Yes, good. Thank you, Doug. Doug asked me, Doug says I asked him to do the impossible, but really he asked me to do the impossible sometimes. And one of the things he said was, I said, well, what do you want me to talk about? And he said, you can talk about facts and figures and the fact that 5 million more women are unemployed than were at the beginning of the pandemic. And many think that it will take over a decade for women to catch back up in the workplace. But you talk about numbers all the time. Why don't you talk about how to lead something that was imagined by someone else? And so I'm going to tell you a little story, because I only have 5 minutes, that describes at least what I consider the 7 steps to take somebody's idea and turn it into something that is durable, sustainable, and creates value. And I think we're going to go to the next slide right now. Is that right, Mike? Can you do that? Thank you. Good. So this is what I reflected on, and you can see if it makes sense for you. So the first thing I did is at the JP Morgan conference in January of 2016, Mary Pittman, a current Carol Emmott Fellowship board member and dear friend of Carol's, came to me and said, I'm wondering if you'd be willing to come and help us create a fellowship. We raised some money when Carol passed, and we're thinking we might have 1 or 2 fellows, and we need somebody to lead it. And I told her I'd do some research and give it a little bit of thought, and we'd talk later. So the first thing I did was step 1, which was to discern Carol's original intent and the big idea behind it. I think if I would have just taken the stated words and made that happen, we would not be here today. Because the big idea behind it was the way Carol lived her life. She cared about public hospitals. She was committed to passing legislation when she was in Washington, D.C., that addressed the needs of all and the inclusion of all in the healthcare system and the caring for them properly. She was a passionate advocate for public hospitals. And in her search career, she went out of her way to find diverse candidates, both women and men, who could come in and lead health systems and create new voices in their leadership team. So I decided the big idea behind it was bigger than the fellowship. And I also got a lot of advice from especially her colleagues and the individuals with whom she lived with at work. Barbara Anderman and others. And Dwayne Donard said, if all you do is a little fellowship, it will die in 2 years. And so you have to come up with whatever was behind it. So Dwayne Donner, who died last year, is one of the people who I listened to the most. In step 2, which was exploring and testing the viability of the big idea and finding others who were committed to it. So initially I went out to people who I knew were in Carol's world and my world. I believe Barbara Anderman and I came up with the list. We had a planning session in San Francisco, but I also went out to all of the advisors that I have worked with over time, either as clients or people who have mentored me who are now leading health systems. And we found a group of people who had been working on things like diversity and inclusion and equity, gender equity, and other things since the 70s, and we're really quite frustrated by the glacial nature of progress today. And actually, as they reflected on what could be done, they really encouraged us to think big about what we were going to do. So I tested Carol's big idea to see whether or not there was commonality with others, because if there weren't people for whom that idea held harmony, attracted their interest, was something they wanted to get behind, it wasn't going to work. So that was the second thing. The third thing was, it seemed like that was possible. We had to find a team of people, and we didn't have any money at the beginning of note. We had less than $100,000, and we had Felisa part-time. And so Barbara Anderman and I were both volunteering at the time, and I volunteered to work up to halftime, and we got Doug Riddle to come and volunteer as well. The fellowship would not exist today without volunteers. And so we brought together a durable and committed core team to begin to build the solutions. And for each of them, I can be a pain in the neck, but I think of it as encouragement to help each of them accomplish more than they ever believed possible, because that's what it was going to take to create something that was significant enough to change a real significant, to address a real significant problem in the field. So that was number 3. The fourth thing we did, so we realized that we had to get solutions off the ground. I also had my own personal time frame. I wasn't willing to work as intensely as I was working for anything longer than 4 years. And so we had to go through creation, alpha state, beta state, and then sustainability. We had to do that in 48 months or less. So we began immediately rigorously measuring the effectiveness of the solution, in this case, the fellowship solution, and the extent to which it was creating real change for our fellows. If it wasn't the inflection point that Carol imagined, if it wasn't something real enough that organizations would be attracted to it and want to continue to commit to it, then it would fail. So we evolved in response to that feedback and always went back to the people with whom the mission was resonating so well and asked for their advice and counsel. And honestly, they're the people who made it happen. Then the fifth thing we did was to ensure that the culture that we had fostered connection, supports trust between the people who are in the environment. Both our I guess we'd call them our partners, our clients, and our team itself, so that you can say, I don't understand this, I don't know this, I'm not sure this is going to work. And it doesn't mean that you are a bad person or failing. What it means is that you're an authentic person who really wants to do something that hasn't been done before. And we also wanted to make sure that every participant felt truly heard. And so we listened to what each one of those people said, and we tried to discern their passion as well as the passion of the individuals who came together to actually create the fellowship. The sixth thing we did was to build solutions both within the fellowship and with its offspring, the Equity Collaborative, that can both be shared widely and customizable locally. Healthcare changes every day. Local markets are different every day. Who could have anticipated we'd be in the middle of a pandemic right now? So we had to believe that we could create something that had a core of insight that could be provided to organizations who could then customize it to fit their environment, whether they're at Marshfield Clinic or at Penn or at Dartmouth or at Duke. We had to essentially make something that worked and could be locally modified to fit the environment where the organizations were actually creating change on the ground in their environment. And then finally, it was important to recognize that the landscape of fully inclusive gender equity is vast and truly intimidating. So we networked broadly with other organizations who shared our passion for gender equality, for racial equality, for essentially the full active and committed participation of everyone in creating the right environment in healthcare in the United States. And so we celebrated their successes. We celebrate the successes of our fellows. We support one another. We spread the word, and we invite others to join in. People would initially say to me, well, don't you think those people are competitors? And I said, no, they're building out a part of the solution that we don't have. I think of them as collaborators. I think of them as our partners, and together we can drive the world to a much better place. Examples of that would be the women business leaders, certainly the women of impact, and then the contributions of each of the organizations that have brought what they know to the Equity Collaborative, especially Yale New Haven, in sharing their leader, Gail Capozzalo, with us to be the staff person for the Equity Collaborative. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg said something, and I'm going to screw up the quote, which is something like, it's important to lead in a way that others would like to follow. And I think these 7 steps are at least my best brief articulation of how one does that. I can't tell you how delighted I am to be here today and how honored I am by what was truly a surprise, the naming of the fellowship after.
Christine, thank you so much. This is not just 7 steps for leading something that was imagined by someone else, although helpful there, but really a great roadmap for engaging people. And, you know, I have to say that the thing is that you created a great organization through your leadership, but you also established a kind of a culture and a way of relating, an ecumenical approach to leadership and to involving others that is still very precious to us. And I think we'll see actually with the presentations by our fellows today about some of the outcomes of that. So once again, thank you very much to Christine Malcolm, who got this thing going and brought us together to do this and made sure that everybody was included. Thank you, Christine. Our first speaker, I'm very excited, is Marissa Keefer, who starting next month will have a new position. It mentions it in the program, so you can see that, where she will become CEO at Children's Memorial Hermann just next month. We're very excited and thrilled for Marissa to have this opportunity to do that. Each of the speakers has a fairly brief time to present. We've asked them to speak for something like 10 to 15 minutes, 15 being the outside, and so that we can move this along. And then we have time for maybe, first of all, for a respondent. We're thrilled that the respondent for Marissa's talk is Jaewon Ryu, who's the CEO of Geisinger and longtime supporter of the fellowship, and also kind of a beacon for many of us in the leadership that he's shown at Geisinger. So Jaewon will have a couple of minutes just to respond and reflect from the standpoint of someone committed to this, a national figure. And then if we have time, we'll have 1 or 2 questions. I'll be watching the message side. So there's a place for you to write on the right side of your screen. You can type questions. I'll try to make notes along with all of the encouragement that goes. I'll try to make notes so that I can ask you any of these questions. Marissa, I'm so pleased that you're here. And I should mention that Marissa is from our second class of the Carol Emmott Fellowship. So we're thrilled to have you. Take it away.
Thanks, Doug. I'm so excited to be here today, and thank you all. Oh, wait, I think Doug, there we go. Thank you all for being here. When the call for presentations came out and asking for something that we were proud of and something of a unique solution during the pandemic, my food pantry story is what came to mind. And because it was truly an all-stars aligned moment in the food pantry and during the pandemic. And so as a non-clinical person, this slide will tell you about the overview of Riley Children's Health. And so really it gives us all the stats and statistics of Riley Children's Health. But the two most important things I want you to take away from this slide are that Riley Children's Health is the only comprehensive children's hospital in the state of Indiana, and we are one of 16 hospitals as part of the larger IU health system. And so as a non-clinical person during the pandemic, can you guys hear me? I just saw a note that I'm frozen. But as a non-clinical person and in a children's hospital, the pandemic did not impact us nearly as much as it did our adult colleagues. And as non-clinical in a clinical pandemic, I felt like there was very little that I could personally do, but certainly wanted to contribute and have an impact. And so the food pantry was really what I was able to dig into and really have an ability to make an impact during the pandemic. And so in the spring, when the pandemic began, like many other organizations across the country, we created an incident command structure. And that incident command structure was both at the system level as well as at the hospital level. And I was tapped to serve as the liaison chief for Riley Children's Health. And in that role, I worked with individuals who wanted to make donations and other offshoot things like finding hotel accommodations for our weary well or our quarantined team members, but a whole variety of things that we were able to do. But one of the things, as I'm sure you all experienced, is the rapid decision-making and the actions that came out of the incident command, both at the system level, but also at the local level. And one of the recommendations that came out from the system level that was an implement was creation of a food pantry to help our team members. And so this was something that, as the liaison chief, felt really nice into my area of opportunity to help during the pandemic, and really was something that I could dig into. On the next slide, you will see the overall information about food insecurity within Indiana. And this was only made more significant as a result of the pandemic. Approximately 60% of our patients are on Medicaid. 22% of the Marion County residents, which is where Riley resides, live in a food desert. And in the pandemic, people lost their jobs and were working less, and only 57% had healthy food. So these are statistics that I was really familiar with because I led our infant mortality and maternal mortality work within the health system, and food, access to healthy food and access to food overall helps promote maternal health, resulting in a healthier pregnancy and healthier babies. And so this was something that I was very familiar with, and with a colleague for many years had been interested in trying to open a food pantry to support our patients. But due to space and funding constraints, we were never able to open the food pantry. However, who would have thought during the pandemic, all the stars aligned and we were really able to open that. And I'll talk through that now. And so first, the food pantry, we have a Ronald McDonald House within our walls at the hospital, and it had to close due to the pandemic. And so I served on the board of the Ronald McDonald House and was the liaison between the hospital and the Ronald McDonald House. And so I was able to help negotiate and ask if we were able to use their space that was closed to have our food pantry. In addition, we created a redeployment pool so that team members who were in certain hospitals like Riley that didn't have a lot of patients were able to be redeployed to areas that really needed additional staff. And so within that redeployment pool, we had 2 amazing social workers that we were able to bring back into Riley to serve as the team members to help start up the food pantry. So we had our space, and then we had our team members. And then third, our Riley Children's Foundation, who is the fundraising arm for the hospital, created the Riley Relief Fund. And in the Riley Relief Fund, they were able to capture the donations from many of our very kind and generous community that were interested in supporting our team and our patients during this time of crisis. And so this really served as our financial support. So we had our 3 things. We had our space, we had our team members, and we had our funding. So our food pantry was born. Next slide. In the beginning of the pantry, it was open only 3 times a week and for 2 hours for each opening. We had morning shifts, afternoon shifts, and evening shifts so that team members were able to come to accommodate during their shift change or when was convenient on their shift. And then we had employees that volunteered to staff the food pantry, in addition to those 2 social workers that I mentioned. But we had volunteers that came and stocked the pantry, as you can see on all of the shelves. They stocked the food donations. And they also, many of our employees were our first people who donated the food for the pantry as well. And so given the infection prevention measures we needed to maintain, we had the volunteers were also packing those boxes that you see in that 3rd picture. And those boxes were given to the team members that visited the food pantry. And team members that had larger families were given 2 or more boxes so that they could feed their families appropriately with the food that was packed within the boxes. And so this was all really exciting and excellent to meet the immediate need during the pandemic and really answer that call from our system to have a food pantry to meet the needs of our patients. But as I said earlier, really making an impact and a difference for our patients was something that was really important to me, and being able to have healthy food options and have food access for many of our patients that struggle with food insecurity was a really important mission and vision for me as we continued this. And so as the pandemic progressed, the Ronald McDonald House determined that they needed to make some changes to their operations, and that included building a new commercial grade kitchen within their space, as well as reducing their number of sleep rooms that were in the hospital proper. But they do have a house outside the hospital as well. And so with that reduction in rooms, they were able to give us permanent space of about 1,000 square feet within the same Ronald McDonald House space and be able to have a permanent food pantry. And then as our patient volumes began to pick up, our social workers that were helping create the food, that helped create the food pantry, had to go back to their clinical duties. And so we really determined that it couldn't be sustained on volunteers alone, and we really needed that point person. So I was able to hire a full-time project coordinator to be responsible for the food pantry, who happened to be one of those initial social workers who was really passionate about this work. And so in the summer, as COVID, at least in Indiana, began to die down a little bit, we were able to have the full-time person and really start to expand into our patient population. So since we were still limited with the space we had and really within infection prevention measures, we really started with targeted in 3 different spots. So we have our high-risk asthma clinic, our emergency department, and then our dialysis center, where we know that those are areas that are high risk for food insecurity and have really high need for access to food. So we have take food from our pantry and are able to stock it in either closets or refrigerators within their space. And so they are able to give that out to their patients. But then we are able to have access to amazing community resources, as you'll see on the next slide. And they have really been, as we've been able to tell the success of our food pantry, we've been really able to expand with community support and really look at opportunities to tell our story really widely. And we've had amazing community support that have been able to come out and either donate food, donate refrigerators for our new construction, and then donate much, much more. And so the construction is going to start in the next couple of weeks and will be finished up in the end of May, in May sometime. And during that, that will allow us, as you'll see on this, there's much of the food is very shelf stable. And so the food that we'll be able to serve within the pantry itself we'll have multiple refrigerators, so we'll be able to have access to healthy fruits and vegetables. And we have partnered with a local food bank to be our stable food source, and we won't have to rely on our team members for donations overall. So we're really excited about this being able to expand and have full access to our entire patient population as well as our team members, and are very excited about this potential. So thank you so much for allowing me to share our story today. That truly was my bright light during the pandemic over the past year.
So Doug, I'm going to go ahead and I think you all can probably hear me, but maybe I'll jump in. And first of all, I want to thank Doug and Ann and Christine and everybody at Carol Emmett. But also, Marissa, I just enjoyed hearing about your experience with the food pantry, because in many ways, it's similar to the journey that we've had at Geisinger with our food pantry, or food, we call ours the Fresh Food Pharmacy. And that's pharmacy spelled with an F. As opposed to a PH, and we do that so it's FFF, Fresh Food Pharmacy, and the program started about 3 years ago, and it's sort of a capability that's near and dear to our hearts. So anytime I hear about other organizations like yours doing this good work, I think we have a smile from ear to ear because we think it's the right work. A few things though, our program was really born out of a clinical need and out of a recognition of a social need. So food insecure folks who really struggled with disease conditions. In our case, it was diabetes that was poorly managed. And obviously it's a food sensitive condition. And that's really how our program came to be. If you walked into one of our sites today, and we have 3 sites scattered throughout our area, you would think it kind of was a cross between sort of a diet and lifestyle clinic meets a social work kind of environment, meets a food pantry. And so we provide free meals essentially to families of people who qualify. So they're food insecure, they have diabetes that's not well controlled as demonstrated through their hemoglobin A1C. And if you qualify based on those 2 criteria, you're enrolled in the program, and it is essentially healthy, lean meats and produce, and having access to that, and more importantly, having access to dietitians and coaches that walk you through how to prepare those foods and really spark a change in the lifestyle. We've seen people, of course, lose weight, but also their hemoglobin A1C. It shouldn't surprise people that we see an average drop of 2 points on that. And that's compared against when we have a diabetic patient who's optimized on all their medications, we actually only see a drop of 1 point. So truly, the Fresh Food Pharmacy has proven to be twice as effective as modern medicine in terms of getting people's uncontrolled diabetes into better control. And so there's a deep-rooted kind of clinical rationale behind the program, but also a mission fidelity, given that we're targeting people who are underserved, vulnerable populations, and their families. Since then, what we've done is we've started to expand and look at populations of other chronic diseases who are also suffering from conditions that are food sensitive. So whether it's CHF or end-stage renal disease, those are some of the areas that we're expanding into. I think some of the data from the program that has been very interesting, as you might expect, aside from the clinical impact of managing the blood sugar better, we have seen decreases in ER utilization, hospital admission rates, and interestingly enough, a 19% increase in the rate at which people use primary care services. And so I think it's the way that we've interpreted that is it really is a demonstration of people getting more engaged around their health and attending or going to your visits with your primary care doc is one indicator of that health engagement. I think the other is more of a qualitative dynamic rather than a quantitative one. If you went and visited our sites and sat and talked with some of the folks visiting as the patients in these clinics, I think you'd hear the word hope quite a bit. These are folks who generally have fallen on hard times. I think, Marissa, very similar to you all's experience with what the pandemic did. Pandemic or not, there are a lot of folks who are struggling to have ends meet. And that is the definition of being food insecure. And so a lot of these folks, I don't think they've had the kind of support or the kind of, they will frequently use the word hope in their lives to give them optimism around how they can get to a better health outcome. I think all of that being said, it's a great clinical program. It's a great way to serve the mission. I do think that there's still a lot of work to do to get traction on formulating a business model that makes programs like these sustainable. There's a lot of philanthropy that can jumpstart these programs, but we also believe that there's a business model that makes it worthwhile. And so as systems and organizations and as the industry moves closer towards value-based payments where providers are at greater risk for the populations that they serve, or if you're an insurance company and you bear risk, I think there is a lot of potential around these sorts of programs driving down the total cost of care by keeping people healthier, preventing and avoiding the downstream ED or hospital utilization. A lot more work to be done on that front. Certainly we're doing that work in terms of doing the math and putting a lot of analytics towards exactly what is the PMPM cost savings, if you will, relative to the level of investment. And at the same time, I think it's going to be powered, or the wind in the sails on this will be as the industry continues to move towards value-based payment. So those are just a snapshot, if you will, of some of the observations we've had to date from our program. But hopefully this is something that everybody attending here will also continue to be passionate about, because I think the need is great and there is opportunity in this space.
Thank you, J1. Really appreciate your comments and the story at Geisinger. Marissa, you already began to address some of this, but we had a question from Rudy Carrion from Unidos US about your focus, and J1 has spoken about how that's working at Geisinger, but your focus on healthy practices and healthy resources in your food bank. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So I think, as I said, once we are able to expand more into having our permanent space where we have the refrigerators and the freezers, we will certainly be able to expand more into having healthier food options. Additionally, we have our social workers who help with that, but we've also plugged into our dietitians who've been able to make up menus and talk about healthy foods and healthy food choices. In addition, with the Ronald McDonald House opening their commercial grade kitchen, we'll be able to utilize that and partner with them to be able to have cooking classes and be able to show people how to make healthy food options with the foods that we offer. And so I think that what has been done at Geisinger is where I see the future. And so for the food pantry, this was the first step of that, but I think there's a lot of opportunity. And certainly with our dialysis patients, that was a big area that we were talking about, and making sure that they had low sodium options and had the options that they were really safe for them to eat.
Do you have some thoughts to, J1, your comments about the business model? It really struck me. We need to create sustainable structures. And I'm wondering, Marissa, what kinds of thinking has gone on in terms of your group about this? And I know you're about to change institutions, but so it's a little bit of an unfair question, but I suspect you've given some thought to this already. Would you like to say a little bit more about that, Marissa?
Sure. And I think that has been some of the challenge why we were never able to really get it off the ground. And we do have a lot of philanthropic support right now, and amazing community support, which is how we've gotten it off the ground. But that has been one of the things that that my colleagues and I were talking about is how do we continue that and really look at other models across the country from a business model standpoint. We certainly have our own health plan within our organization, but looking at, we've got great partnerships with several of our providers that actually still practice within the organization that are leading key areas, our Medicaid within the state as well. So I think those are things we've talked about, but you're right. I'm currently unemployed, and so no longer with the organization, but certainly excited to see where they take it because the sustainability is going to be the key overall.
Yeah, okay. Christine asks a good point. She references the work that Linda Gifford did in this similar area with Henry Ford system. And I think I understood you to say that you began focusing on employees and staff and food insufficiency with them. I think the question from Christine is that still a focus for what you're doing? You talked about turning more to the need for, in the patient population, but have you continued then to make sure that the health system employees who experience hunger and homelessness are also still focused on?
Absolutely. Yes. So we have, so the team members is where it absolutely started. We will continue to serve our team members. And that will be a key piece. We opened up, in addition to the food pantry, we opened a food closet up within that's more centrally located within the hospital. That is it is an empty closet that we put in food, more meals, so that if they needed an access to a meal at any time, they're able to go and do a grab and go meal out of the closet. But yes, and then we have a social worker that runs the food pantry, as I said, but we also have a social worker that's dedicated to our team members that are the lower wage workers. And one of the things that they're doing is helping them connect with resources, because that was another key piece for our team members, most specifically, but also our patients. Really teaching them to fish was kind of a key thought that we had, as well as and hooking them up with the right resources within the community and making sure they had all of the things that they needed from a community standpoint.
Thank you so much. I wish I knew how on this platform to allow the thunderous applause to take place. But great appreciation to Dr. Jaewon Ryu for responding and sharing Geisinger's story. Really interesting and a lot of comments. So I hope we have a chance to kind of get into that in further conversations. And Marissa, just so pleased to hear what you've done and also real proud of your advancement. I wish you well, and I hope that in fact, what you've done there at Riley is able to continue well. I see lots of applause in it's a little odd though, but lots of applause in the messages. So thank you both very much, and we'll turn to our next speakers here in a minute. I don't know if it's odd for you, those of you in the audience, but I have a significant auditory delay because of my system. So I beg your forbearance as I'm trying to respond in a timely way to them. I'm really thrilled with our next speakers. We actually have a panel that are 3 members from our 4th class from the Carol Emmott Fellowship. You can see Heather Nelson, at least on my screen. Heather's over on the left, Irene Kim and Lee Burgess, who will be speaking to us about what their class, they did a little research within the class, the CEF4, to kind of hear how people were responding with creative solutions to the challenges that were upon us from the pandemic. I am actually don't have my text up, or else I would be able to tell whether our respondent, who I'm looking here real quick, who was having technical problems. But our respondent is supposed to be, and I'll be looking for him, Dr. Kevin Fickenshire, who many of you know is also on the board of the Carol Emmott Foundation. He's the chair and CEO of First Care, and has been doing consulting and leadership on strategy for quite a long time. I enjoy Kevin's Fickenshire Files, which is a periodic gathering of information and his thoughts, and I found it quite inspirational, useful. So I hope he's able to join us. If not, I'll introduce Ann McCune if he's not able to deal with his battery problems. But in the meantime, we're thrilled to introduce these three representatives from CEF4 to talk about portraits of women in action during the COVID-19 pandemic. Take it away, my friends.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start, and I just first wanted to thank Christine Malcolm for her, obviously her support, her inclusivity, and really just being someone that you can fully be yourself around. I only met her one time last February when our group came together, but I just personally wanted to thank you for this opportunity. I'm just so pleased to be presenting at the symposium that bears your name, along with my colleagues from CEF4. If you go to the next slide, this truly is representative of all of these fabulous women from our class. This is a listing of our class. I think we were a large class. We had 21 folks in our fellowship class. And really, we are representing the work and the portraits of excellence that occurred during the pandemic. Over the next 20 minutes, we're really going to look at COVID in a different way. We've heard some, certainly during the alumna piece of our program, we heard how to lead through times of the pandemic, how to work in a virtual world, a lot of how-tos and how to learn froms. This has that same vein, but it's about what did we learn that we can replicate that was excellence, that was something that made life easier, that we don't want to let it go because it works so well. So thank you to all of these women, next slide, that I actually was able to interview over the fall time from October through December. I'll go through the process if you could go to the next slide. Sorry, I can't advance them. There we go. Really quickly, this is what the process was to collect the information that we're going to share with you today. So it was basically a lovely opportunity for me to sit for 45 minutes to an hour with each of the fellows and talk to them and talk through these three questions. Really simple questions. And this presentation will summarize that. So this is really the first of what we are putting out into the world, and we're looking to publish next an article that really summarizes these trends. And so we hope you enjoy learning about what we discovered during this process. Next slide, please. So I think the key thing, this was a really cool quote. I just enjoyed it in the sense of that I feel like probably everyone, all 114 who are on this call, really match this description. Some women fear the fire, some women become it. And we really did become it with regard to what we did in the trends that emerged. Next slide. So these are the 5 key areas that out of the 21 interviews that emerged. And we're going to highlight each of these in some form over the next couple minutes. We each will share a story, and we will talk about the key findings from the interviews with each of the fellows. And again, it comes with people being open about sharing what worked and what didn't work. And really, we're going to be talking about what worked. So we're going to start with the number 1, which is new decision-making agility. We're also going to talk about accelerated coordination, teamwork, positive attitude, and also opportunities to lead. Next slide. So the meaning of agility to a COVID patient. And so this will be my opportunity to share our story. My story comes from Dartmouth-Hitchcock, where I was the former vice president of research operations. Why I put it is personal, and this is something that as we were going through our practice sessions that Doug gave us really good advice. He goes, this is personal, and really giving us guidance in the sense of the virtual environment and how to engage with others and how to present. But I think I took it as, this is personal. COVID is personal. In some form or fashion, we've each experienced a loss or a change or a sadness of something that, isn't anymore. This is actually a personal story that's happy, not personal to me, but personal in the sense of, as an administrator, I think one of the key things I've always said, if someone says, why do you do what you do, is I hope I'm making a difference. I hope I'm making a difference in administrations, in operations, in someone's life. Something I'm doing somewhere along the way is going to be a positive. In this case, it was very obvious for our teams, and really I take no credit in that, but in the sense of being able to build. For 3 years, we built the research infrastructure from 2017 when I began at Dartmouth after leaving Duke. And we built the infrastructure, and we were actually, and who knew it, getting ready. We were getting ready for this patient, who the last text that he sent to his wife, he doesn't even remember sending it, and he was our first patient on our remdesivir study. He said, on 6 liters of oxygen, not good. And that was the last text he had before he went on a ventilator. This was our first patient on our remdesivir study, and Dartmouth-Hitchcock was one of the sites, one of the first 20 sites in the United States to have that opportunity for their patients. We're small, but we are mighty in the sense of being able to support our patients. But the only reason we were able to do everything that we did to open the study in a record 8 days, 8 calendar days, and normally research operations don't move that fast. I think you're in a really healthy space if you're anywhere between the 60 and 90-day range for a therapeutic study, and we did it in 8. But what we were doing for the 3 years prior was preparing for that moment that patient needed us, for that moment when he walked into our ED and was admitted. So I think from the perspective of, if we think about the trends, the agility to make decisions and to be able to work through issues in a very timely, non-bureaucratic manner was incredibly helpful for us. We were able to cut through, I think, some of the timelines and the inefficiencies. And of course, we were all willing to work, and I know we don't always want to do this forever, but we were willing to work as many hours as it took and to meet people and to really problem solve at the highest levels, because people's lives were, on the line. And as clinicians and administrators and operations and support folks of healthcare, this is really why we do what we do. So I think agility meant a lot for us. Not only we were able to open the study in 8 days, but how we worked together and how we problem solved. I think from the very beginning, our lead nurse, our director of nursing, we were working in our clinical research unit. It was consenting the patients and being able to have the barriers and the correct barriers in place and learning what to do. And we just kept learning very quickly, and we're agile on how we addressed it. We didn't stop or have to have a meeting, or because sometimes, at least in my world, there's meetings about meetings. So I think we were able to do some things much faster. Next slide. Some of the reasons that we were able to do that, and I love alliteration, so tension, tools, titles, and timing. And you can read under each one of these kind of how those all came into the new decision-making agility. But there was a little tension in the sense of being able to make a decision and move forward. And when you're doing things outside of your comfort zone, which many of us, that's where we live most of the time, it's going to get a little uncomfortable. Or if you're making a decision as a leader and you're not, someone didn't bless it, and that's okay, because, we were moving things forward for the right reason. I think there was also just a tension of, is that a good idea? I don't think so. Should we open that study? And I think we were having some really healthy conversations in very adult ways most of the time. we had new tools and we figured things out. If we needed resources, we got creative. It didn't matter what your title was. We welcomed you to the table to talk about how we could do this quicker, better, faster. And everyone was needed. And it was interesting, the lead physician for the remdesivir study, I didn't meet him in person until 3 months later, after we launched the study in the month of March. And we launched in the second or third week of March of 2020, and that patient came in that same week. And without that, he would not have been able to be on the study. And he stated that without it, he would not have lived. And so for me, agility, that was the definition of how it can be personal and how we can take these opportunities to make sure that we repeat it. You know, the ability to look at these 4 T's and then think about how they can actually move us forward in the future. And, you know, an example in research operations is, can we do that maybe not in 8 days, but how about 28 days, or how about 38 days instead of 338 days? So just thinking about how you repeat and what you stop doing. You know, you don't want to work 16 hours a day, those types of things. But, you know, you can certainly repeat some of these things. So with regard to new decision-making agility, this was key for us and how we moved forward. So I'm going to hand it off now to Heather, who's going to talk about accelerated collaboration and support and how that was demonstrated during our interviews and how we saw it across the 21 institutions that we represent.
Great. Thank you, Lee. Next slide. You can go to the next slide for me, please. So I'm going to touch a little bit and emphasize this accelerated collaboration and support. And you'll see this quote here. And it's an excerpt from some prose that one of our sisters, Rathan Malevoy, wrapped up for us on our last day together a year ago, if you guys can believe it, a year ago tomorrow when we were all together. And she summed up this in a prose, and I want to read a little excerpt of this because what we went through together as a cohort and as a class and as a sisterhood was unprecedented. And I know Anne calls us the COVID class, and we had this truly accelerated collaboration and support because we have only had 3 days together in person. But I always knew there were other small waves like me who were trying to crush their own part of the rock. They too came back disappointed. But today, 20 of those small waves joined my wave. And today, for the first time, I feel that we can make a difference. Together, we form a big wave and we head to the rock. We know we will make a difference. Tomorrow, we will have more waves join us, and certainly we will crush that rock. The rock that is so stubborn and so unwilling to change. We will break the rock and we will chart the course for our own destiny. To me, next slide, please. This is really what CEF, when Lee asked me, did the CEF community assist you during the year? And if so, how? Those 3 days, 1 year ago tomorrow, were probably 3 of the most impactful and meaningful days of my career. I didn't know it then, but reflecting on those 3 days today with all of you here, wow. How lucky was I to be nominated by my former boss, who's here today, Sharon O'Keefe, to be considered for the Carol Emmott Fellowship. How fabulous was it to be selected and recognized as a fellow candidate for the 2020 cohort? How amazing was it to meet 20 beautiful, accomplished, caring, funny, passionate, and trusting female healthcare leaders that quickly turned into 20 friends. This cohort has been unique, thrust into a new world, a new way of living, working, and socializing through this worldwide pandemic, through the civil and social unrest and injustice that we've seen over these many, many months. We haven't seen each other in person for a year, but I will tell you, we've remained connected, we remained collaborative, and we support each other in so many things. And we have throughout these last several months, sharing stories, being able to say, hey, have you ever done this? What have you guys done? We did this. If you go to the next slide, please. We did this through text strings, which I don't know about my fellow team members. Those text strings have gotten me through some pretty crummy days and make me laugh, make me cry, make me want to stand up and cheer. I can be my most vulnerable self, and there's never any judgment. I can ask for feedback and get it in the most firm but loving way. I can offer assistance and feedback and be welcomed and appreciated. This fellowship, the CEF4 fellowship, is a strong, talented, and dedicated healthcare group of leaders that's been my source of support and collaboration. When I've needed confidence, I have 20 confidants. They're there for me. I do not know what magical unicorn horn of pixie dust that the Carol Emmott team has to bring women together every year from all over the US, but it is truly amazing. Thank you. Thank you all for believing in me, for challenging me, for educating me, for making me laugh. You have given me the confidence to be my best self and to never apologize for being who I am. I know that these 20 sisters will be forever by my side, sometimes lifting me up, but always with me. And I owe that to the magic that is the Carol Emmott Fellowship. So I'm going to turn it over to my friend Lee again, who's going to walk through open-minded innovation.
So we'll quickly go through this one in the sense of, next slide, please, to talk about the key things that emerged from the interview. So open-minded innovation really was across, again, all 21 organizations. And I think what was interesting about that in some of the quotes was around who was invited and all ideas being welcomed. And that I think the other key area that emerged from this particular trend was more strategic than ever, and being able to be involved in strategy where maybe, you didn't feel like you were in something strategic before, or it felt, from a day-to-day perspective that you were doing the same thing. There was opportunity to really think outside the box, literally, about how to get PPE, how to enact, new policies, processes, procedures. And really, that was a key connection too for CEF across not only our class, but across classes, because I know we reached out to our colleagues in other classes as well. And maybe they weren't the key person, but there was someone under their institution that could help us be, thinking innovatively or thinking, outside the box about what we wanted to do. And I think that was really focused with intention. It wasn't like, oh, how do we innovate and how do we get better? It was like, we have to do this to get to here. And what is that gap and how do we define it? Sometimes you had to be bold and you had to make big swings of bold, which probably all of us did that at our different institutions. And you had to maybe stop doing some things and start doing other things, which was also consistent throughout the interviews. I think a key piece here too was we knew we were resilient. I think every single person probably on this call can say that about themselves, or if they don't, they should. But they realized just how resilient they were. They knew they could lead, but they really didn't know, kind of in the sense of the barometer of innovation, how far could they push it, where could they go? And there was just an openness to doing this and doing things differently. Next slide, please. I think, again, I've added quotes in this, and I think this was just another one. And if you know who said it, let me know, but I couldn't find it. But empowered women empower women. And so I think that was the other thing connected to being open-minded is, making sure that we were supporting one another and making sure we were innovating and thinking differently, not only around the business aspects of what we were doing in our operations and our administration, but also the human side to what we were doing. So I know in our group, which I'm not a member yet, I haven't turned to the Peloton side yet, but there's a Peloton group in our group. So that was a key thing for them to be connected. I think our text and the ways that we communicated, as Heather mentioned as well, were key things, not only for sharing of great information, but just a really funny video, or I'm guilty of sending a lot of dog pictures because we have a new puppy, but just kind of keeping people light, when we needed a lighter moment. And sometimes that's actually being innovative and different because it's just something that, you're not always receiving the most positive news during these times or feeling the most positive. So sometimes being happy and funny and creative is a way of being innovative in our environment. So I appreciated that very much across our group. Next slide. So Heather, back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. And I think this goes without question. As all of us were, neck deep or eyebrow deep in what was going on in the world and within our organizations, having that pervasive, positive, all-in attitude. I think many of us talked about, guess what? We were asked to do things that weren't in our comfort zones. We were asked to step outside of those and be an incident commander, to make quick decisions, to be agile, to be nimble. And, for many of us, we took on those responsibilities with all of our heart because we knew in the middle of everything that we do, patients are at the center of that. And so, I was just so in awe, just hearing not only about the challenges and being supportive, but just hearing about the awesomeness. And many of us took that awesomeness and applied it within our organizations. And we kind of called it, the best practice incubator. So, Lee could provide some insight of what they were doing. And I would say, gosh, I'm going to try that at UChicago Medicine. So it was really, really amazing. So I also want to turn this over to Irene because she is one of the strongest leaders we have. And she wants to share with all of you about what's personal, what it means to her.
Next slide, please. Thank you so much, Heather. So leadership, COVID made leadership personal, and COVID forced us all at our respective institutions to make hard decisions, rapidly develop protocols, and demonstrate leadership. My background is that I am a liver and kidney transplant surgeon at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. I'm also the co-director of the transplant program, which includes heart and lung transplant. Early in the pandemic, I was met with my first challenge related to COVID-19. As many of you experienced, there was a national shortage of personal protective equipment, or PPE. And as a result of this, at our institution, we took a hardline stance on who would be eligible for the more protective N95 masks. Coincidentally, within the transplant community, the communication to transplant providers was that all patient-facing clinicians should use N95s not only for our personal protection, but to protect our immunocompromised patients. And therefore, I found myself in this really uncomfortable position mediating between our hospital administration and our transplant providers, who rightfully felt that they needed maximum PPE. This conversation reached top leadership at my institution. The providers were truly terrified, and I received email communications like, who's going to take care of my family when I die from COVID? And on the other side, I had to represent an overwhelmed hospital administration trying to ration a very precious and scarce resource. So like Heather and Lee alluded to, I turned to my sisterhood at the Carol Emmott Foundation, our class. And like Heather said, on any given day, you'll see this long text thread of institutional protocols, advice, and best of all, support. So I'm happy to say that we did arrive at a compromise at my institution. And after a lot of deliberation, we decided that we would allow a limited supply of N95s for our transplant providers. And it was a great resolution and compromise to a very stressful situation. Next slide. So COVID created a lot of new opportunities to demonstrate leadership, and Lee did these amazing interviews with each fellow, and she found that all the fellows assumed expanded new roles in leadership during COVID-19. The resiliency was affirmed by many of our fellows, and some of our fellows created new platforms for inclusion and equity during this time. Some of our fellows created new opportunities to lead and to shine, and some of our fellows created new paths to meet other people within leadership. So whether or not we wanted to, I think we met COVID-19 with strength and head on. So I'll turn it back to Lee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next slide, please. and our last slide, really just to bring it all back together again, really we talk through these these 5 areas and how it's personal to us in certain areas of these trends. These are the 5 trends that emerged for the class of 2020 CEF4. I bet there are probably similar trends in the other classes, and we would like to continue that these positive trends move forward into 2021 and beyond, and that we keep thinking agilely out of the box, being positive, having folks at the table that have never been at the table before, and being open to innovation. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you as we move forward, and we've really enjoyed representing all 21 institutions of CEF4 with our presentation. Thank you very much.
Awesome work. Thank you so much. I understand that Kevin is online. I don't have other evidence, but there's a picture of him. How's that? Kevin, if you're with us, if you could go ahead and turn on your microphone and your camera, and we'd love to hear your response to the presentation by Lee, Heather, and Irene. And thank you all so much for that. And with this platform, we have to be very patient, which is, of course, one of my great strengths. Actually, that's a lie. I'll tell you what, I haven't heard from him. You know what? I see Ann McCune. I'm going to ask Ann to go ahead and respond. Ann, of course, is our CEO for the foundation. And it's just my practice to plug Ann into any gap that should appear anywhere when we need to be represented. So sorry about Kevin's not being able to be here. Such a great presentation. But Ann, would you like to respond?
Thank you. And I want everyone in the audience, I want you to wave your hands. I'm going to try to do this without crying because what you did was really moving. And I think these 21 women are not a wave, they're a tsunami. And I think this tsunami has absolutely had impact on the industry. President Biden should be inviting us to the table to really talk about what we need to do on the ground to really think about COVID and managing COVID within our health system infrastructure, private and public. All of the things that you shared this year in terms of knowledge and support was something that, a lot of other institutions would have been finding that energy and finding those resources somewhere else, and sometimes they wouldn't have even happened. And so it's a gift that you are the COVID class of 2020. No, you hated it in the beginning. We went through, as everyone can imagine, hunkered down and said, how are we going to be virtual, and how are we going to connect, and how are we going to solve problems, and how are we going to learn? And look at what we did. Connected in ways that people didn't think two-dimensionally that it could happen. And as Heather is the CIO and the one who keeps track of things, she's keeping track of all the hugs we've missed, and that's certainly something that happens. But the absolute intention of everyone coming together to be present with a world of change around them. I mean, Eva, who was out there, was moving out of New York into Saratoga. Lee has a dog that everybody follows and loves in terms of a rescue. Irene's family and her kids were, homeschooled, and everybody was really, managing. I know that Morgan was, managing kids and everybody else in terms of through this, and everyone juggled. Jen from Hopkins built a house and moved in a house. And so beyond just the incredible, brilliant work that happened, life went on in isolation, but together. And you can't say enough about the virtuality of things, and you can't say enough about the intimacy of what it is, but it's been an amazing year. The CEF4 is going to continue through the fall, and we've got a lot of making up to do. So I know CEF3, you were always up to something. These guys are going to be making up some other things too. So Doug, did you want to bring in any questions?
We're not going to really have time at this
Good.
point because I want to make sure we have enough time for Gerlinda. But there's so much love coming across in the comments, and we'll listen for the thunderous applause emotionally anyway as we go forward. Thank you so much. What a great representation from CEF4, and thank you for stepping in. I know Kevin will be heartbroken that he wasn't able to be at this particular point on, but I'm sure we'll hear from him as well later. So thank you all very much, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce our final speaker from our very first class. So that's also pretty thrilling, that the kind of continuity we have with nearly getting close to 100 women in the fellowship at this point with this new class CEF5 that we've spent the last 2.5 days with. But I'm thrilled to have Gerlinda Gonzalez with us, VP of Patient Care Services at John Muir. And Gerlinda's going to talk specifically about what her own team was able to do. And I think it brings a great kind of specificity and detail with wonderful examples of creative solutions to the kind of insane world that we had. And I'll mention now as well that we're very fortunate to have our dear friend Odette Bolano, President and CEO of St. Alphonsus, who will be responding to Gerlinda when she's done. And we'll see if we have time for Q&A at any point after that. Gerlinda, so thrilled to have you here today. So it's your time. Take care.
Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you to the Foundation for allowing me to speak at the second annual Christine Malcolm Symposium. It is my esteemed honor to be speaking amongst the speakers that have spoken before me. And thank you to CEF4 for setting the stage for my talk, which I think follows it very beautifully. So I'm going to talk about the silver linings of the pandemic. I'm going to ask all of you to reflect back on 2020 and reframe the narrative to include the beauty. The pandemic has placed us all on this continuum of grief. But as we transition and transform from denial to acceptance, this is when our true transformation takes place. If we pause long enough, we can bear witness to these silver linings and open ourselves up to hope and optimism. What I choose to remember years from now are the silver linings of the pandemic that I have been privileged to bear witness to. Next slide, please. The first silver lining I saw, although it wasn't my perspective at the time, was the unparalleled courage of our staff and clinicians. These individuals put the needs of others before their own and right in front of their own fears for their safety as well as the safety of their families. We had clinicians that actually volunteered to run towards the danger, despite ambiguity and uncertainty about PPE. What type of mask would we use? Who would use what? How much supply would we have? How long would it last? What was the proper process for donning and doffing? The number of patients, how many were we going to see? A few, a handful, hundreds? There were so many unknowns about the disease process, treatment modalities. What was evidence-based? What would we have access to? We had no playbook, and we relied on our guiding principles to do the right thing, and that served us well. I remember when I received the first call that we would be accepting our first patient. I was surrounded by my CEF sisters in the lobby of a hotel in Chicago. It was right at the end of that convergence. I shared my news with my sisters, and we all took a collective deep sigh, knowing that the storm was about to hit all of us. But already, even at that moment, feeling assured that we would get through it together. Next slide, please. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the light that came through in the cracks that was the pandemic for us. It was this birth of incredible creativity. To see this level of ingenuity and innovation in the midst of a crisis was something to behold. It was humbling. We watched our clinicians build the plane as they were flying it. On the upper left-hand corner of the slide, you'll see a mirror. We put mirrors in the hallways between rooms so that staff could watch themselves donning and doffing and make sure that they were doing it in the correct order. It also allowed them to disinfect the entirety of their face shields so that they can use them for their entire shift. We repurposed glass windows for communication and monitoring to make sure that we could see our patients and see our colleagues and identify any breaches in PPE. In the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, you'll see the ventilator controls outside of the room, along with all of the IV pumps. This was done in order to maximize PPE and minimize the number of times clinicians had to enter and exit the rooms. Along with that came the use of 25-foot-long IV tubing. The pool noodles are on this slide because those were used after being sliced in half to make sure that the IV tubing would stay off the floor so that we wouldn't cross-contaminate. And in the lower left-hand corner of the slide is what's called a stat lock. These are typically used, placed on a patient's chest to help secure IV tubing. During the pandemic, we're placing them outside of ICU rooms to make sure that IV tubing can make it through safely through the doors. We also had a brilliant staff nurse teach us how to use a clamshell food container to don and doff N95s. So you see those two pictures at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. This way, a clinician can quickly, if you go back to the previous slide, put the N95 mask on, secure the straps, and without ever having to touch the outside of the mask. In the upper right-hand corner is the long hallway that now houses all of our staff's PPE that they will use for extended use. It's organized alphabetically, and each staff member has their own bag. In the middle of the slide are our brand new isolation code blue PPE cards. What we quickly learned is that when clinicians enter a room to respond to a code blue to resuscitate a patient, they don their PPE, which can be somewhat of a scramble, looking for all the pieces and parts. But it's no longer obvious what their role is on the code team. So now these isolation blue PPE cards are alongside every code card. And so they're brought to the outside of the room. The clinician quickly dons the PPE that's all available for them in the drawers, and they place a color-coded name tag so that their role in the code is clear to the entire team. So these are just a few examples of the ingenuity and innovation that took place at our organization. Like many organizations, we became increasingly reliant on technology along with all of these other inventions. Telehealth, visitations via iPads, and we even installed cameras to increase visibility in rooms where we didn't have the benefit of a window. Next slide, please. I love this quote from the Belfast, Ireland COVID response team because it talks about love in action, that we can look into the emptiness as not the end of the world, but the most remarkable act of global solidarity. Next slide. And we saw the solidarity in the form of community, both internally and externally. Internally, we witnessed collaboration across the aisles between physician groups, such as the anesthesiologists and intensivists, that quickly came up with order sets to manage difficult airways in a matter of weeks. We saw empathy between departments who were not taking care of our COVID patients and those that were. They sent each other cards and posters and e-cards of support. Staff working extra on units that were outside of their division, knowing that their colleagues were growing tired. Across states, we had clinicians of our own fly to New York to work in hospitals to help ease their burden. Even our regulatory bodies in California provided waivers, loosening regulatory requirements to help ease the strain. Externally, we had, like what most organizations experienced, cars parading around the hospitals, drive-bys, just our community support. We had tons of donations of all kinds of things, food, plants, and we even had a 4,000-pound donation of See's candy. We had to create a committee just to accept all of these donations. We had signs and banners and cards and even ice sculptures that decorated the outsides of our hospitals. And most importantly, we had what's been mentioned so many times before. We supported each other across the United States with texts and emails between our CEF Fellowship sisters. Next slide, please. So what if the darkness is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? Next slide, please. And that really speaks to a rebirth of sorts. Joanna Macy, who's an eco-philosopher and Buddhist scholar, writes about something called Bardo. Bardo is the Tibetan Buddhist concept of a gap between worlds where transition and transformation is possible. So maybe this is our opportunity to step into a space of reimagining. And this is where creativity definitely comes into play. In this gap, she invites us to gaze into mirror wisdom. Mirror wisdom reflects everything just as it is. And she challenges us to not look away, to not avert our gaze, and to not turn aside. Next slide, please. So what did we see in that mirror that wanted us to look away? It was the second pandemic, systemic racism. The pandemic's disproportionate impact on our Black, Indigenous, people of color communities brought to light the racial disparity and inequities present in our healthcare systems. The senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others brought to light how systemic racism was nothing novel or new. Racism has infected our country for the past 400 years. It was as if the pandemic designed this pause, and we as a nation started to see it, really see it, and pay close attention to our reflection. What did our organization's reflection show? We heard directly from our employees that we could be better and that we can be better. During the pandemic, we were able to stand up a belonging and equity office and hire an executive director and staff to lead us forward. I'm proud to say that we made Martin Luther King holiday an official holiday at our organization during the pandemic. And what did my own reflection show? Well, it showed that I had engaged in my own type of colorblindness. Being the daughter of immigrants, I was taught not to stand out, to make myself small, not to rock the boat. My reflection showed that I myself, as a woman of color, also had work to do. I needed to stand in my power and worth and reconnect with my vision and values. It was my turn to apply intentionality to being an ally. Next slide, please. And so as we're all experiencing our own different types of awakening, Joanna Macy talks about the fact that there are 3 different realities that people choose. The first of which is business as usual, that nothing should change, that we should return back to the status quo as soon as possible. The second of which is the great unraveling, that what we are witnessing is the apocalypse, that systemic racism will continue to unravel our BIPOC populations, and that this crazy climate will continue to cause extinctions and extreme weather. And thirdly, the great turning, a creation of a life-sustaining society with the emergence of new and creative responses. Responses much like what was talked about by CEF4 in the previous presentation, where we engage in cooperation versus competition and respect versus exploitation. Next slide, please. When we change the I for we, even illness becomes wellness. Next slide, please. So another silver lining, a new focus on wellness. We know that the past year, PTO was canceled, travel was not possible. The normal coping mechanisms that people relied on were not available to them. People still work long hours, extra shifts, and we know that our clinicians are tired. We're all tired. They describe how their armor has been broken down, that they can't find respite, even at home. And we know that wellness is no longer a nice to have, but a need to have. And we also know that now that things are starting to settle, the untoward effects will settle in as well. Feelings that we've compartmentalized over the last 11 months, this past year, will emerge. And how do we change a post-traumatic stress disorder into post-traumatic strength? We had the following listed interventions here at our organization, but we knew that we needed to shift their focus to treat a chronic state and not just an acute state. Next slide, please. So what do we need to get on the roadmap to wellness and to resilience and to evolving into a better organization? We need to think about what skills are needed for the future. We know that we need people that are emotionally smart, people that understand how to inspire our workforce and change the priority to a daily joy. Wellness needs to be the top priority for our workforce. We know now more than ever that we need to digitize. This will allow us to integrate care across the continuum to support a global economy. In 2022, we will face significant healthcare provider shortages. If we build the infrastructure for a global digital footprint, we will no longer be bound by geographical constraints. We can provide the right care at the right time with better access and affordability. We need to acknowledge the fact that we have a trauma-informed workforce, and we need to be adequately prepared with skills to help one another feel emotionally safe. These skills are learned from behavioral and addiction medicine. These are the skills we need. At our organization, we did a great job standardizing HRO for physical safety. So now our call to action is to standardize practices for emotional safe behaviors. We need to align our focus to behavioral health. This area of medicine is front and center. Consider the areas of dense congregation and recovery centers and prisons and communities where many people live in tight spaces. We know now that these are the areas of highest risks and they need to be accessing care. The good news, another silver lining, is that earlier this month, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration awarded 134 clinics millions of dollars to convert to a certified community behavioral health clinics model that ensures that these clinics don't operate at a loss when they're providing high quality care. Next slide, please. We may not have chosen the time, but the time has chosen us. 2020, the year of the nurse and midwife. I did not know how to address what seemed like impossible challenges back in February of 2020. But now I know we possess the creativity to not only survive, but provide the necessary care to the communities we serve. I have no doubt that on the other end of this pandemic, we will rise a more efficient, thoughtful, and evolved organization. In the face of adversity, ambiguity, and the unknown, I watched my team run towards the fire, not away from it. Amidst widespread fear and anxiety, invention, innovation, and character was born, built, and harnessed. Teams that were often at odds or on different sides of the care team playing field quickly worked together to solve problems. Groups of people that had not worked together before quickly formed highly functional and productive teams. We came together to share our expertise while simultaneously supporting our collective vulnerability. As a result, we will continue to rise stronger, better, and wiser. I leave you now with an excerpt from a poem read by Amanda Gorman at the inauguration. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it. If only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome, I'm just blown away, but in the meantime, I'd like to invite Odette to comment as I get my microphone out of the way. Odette, thank you for being with us.
Well, good afternoon. And Gerlinda, what a wonderful story you tell. I think that, it was enlightening and uplifting. And as I sat here listening to your presentation, I said to myself, how will 2020 go down in history? Will it be filled of reflection on our humanity and our responsiveness, or just focused on our troubles and our divisiveness? And I think that your presentation really hopefully brings us to that humanity and that responsiveness. I loved your quotes. I think that they were just so uplifting and just beautiful quotes about really what's happened over the last, 58 weeks that we've all been in some level of COVID responsiveness. And I would remind us that in the midst of chaos, innovation, and creativity really thrive. And your presentation really reflects that significantly. I would share a couple of things that we have done within our ministry and our health system. And while we mourn the losses that we've had, we celebrate the lives that we have saved. And in each one of our emergency rooms and our critical care, our COVID critical care units and other COVID units, we have posters that every day are uplifting, because we reflect every day a change in how many people we have cared for. And I think that has been truly inspirational for our staff to not just reflect on the lives lost, but on the great work that they have done. We stood in solidarity when we pulled over 300 people to stand up our incident command center and our sub teams and our sections. And I would share with these awesome women here that all our key incident command leadership positions were all manned by women. And, when I say we stood in solidarity, when we needed across Trinity Health to get nurses to the areas that were surging at the time, we had over 45 staff members leave their families, go into areas that they did not know to support those staff members in Trenton, New Jersey, New York, Atlanta, Michigan, and Iowa. It was really uplifting to hear the stories and how they bonded with those people in those ministries to really care and stand side by side in our mission to do everything we could to care for the COVID patients. We also, in less than a week, we were able to deploy teams to go up and set up telehealth in all 4 hospitals to use, as you said, your iPads, everything to, as we all curtailed visitation, but knew that patient advocacy was number one. And how did we keep those family members engaged with the families, but also to set up telehealth so we could keep an eye and do a lot of our care for our chronic patients through telehealth. So that team was amazing. And then when our governor said priority group included teachers, and teachers were going back to school in less than 48 hours, we stood up a high throughput vaccination clinic to get as many teachers in that within 48 hours of his announcement through and vaccinated at least their first dose. when I think about the collaboration that you talked about in your community, I think all of us can reflect that we've all collaborated, even with our largest competitors. And, we're a two health system town, if you will, and arch, competitors. But we all came together to do press conferences on a weekly basis with our CMOs. The CEOs came together to do press conferences. We shared in our need for testing and how we were doing testing. With the recent storms in Texas, we all shared who could share vaccinations so we wouldn't have to cancel or reschedule patients. We came together that way. We distributed information to local businesses together collaboratively to make sure that they knew how to keep their spaces safe. And when we talk about the love that we all experience in our communities from the gifts and the love that they shared for our healthcare workers, I sat back one day and said, what are we doing to challenge ourselves to support our communities, right? And I put a challenge out there for our healthcare providers to go out, our CEOs across our region to go out and create acts of kindness in our communities so we could also not be takers, but givers of that love that we were feeling. We also knew that our staff, as yours, Gerlinda, was going through a lot. And so we set up our colleague care program and created Zen rooms in a lot of our nursing units and had colleagues that were trained to go and interview and support staff that were struggling. We also set up a food pantry where mothers, could go and buy the dinner that they couldn't cook that day. We worked with United Way and Boys and Girls Club when all our schools closed. And what were we going to do with our nurses who needed support so they could come to work? And so how could we work with them and really engage in community focus of all of us working together to support each other? I would say that, the injustices that you reflected on, and that we all, even though we may have thought, I'm a woman of color, as you are, and I understand racism, that I really had to look deep in and say, do I really understand racism in the way that it's coming at us? And how do I, as a CEO, stand up and really portray my weaknesses and challenge my organization to do more in those areas? I also think that having the commitment of making sure that we transform our boards, we transform our leadership positions, that we are looking and being biased to those that have more to offer, that we at times have not given the chance to provide that leadership in our organizations. Are we really, if we think hard enough, doing what we need to? And so that is the journey that we are on. And I would say just quickly, there's two quotes. As I read your quotes, I said, man, those are such great quotes. So I would leave everybody with two different to add to your quotes. One by Steve Marabi that wrote, "Life, the truth, and being free. Life does not get easier or more forgiving. We just get stronger and more resilient." And Michelle Obama once said, "Grief and resilience live together in harmony." So thank you for allowing me to be the respondent to your presentation, Gerlinda, and always a great admiration for the Carol Emmott Foundation and what we are all trying to do here to lift up women. So thank you.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Odette. Really remarkable. Gerlinda, do you have anything you'd like to add to, in response particularly to what Odette shared with us? I want to give you another moment. We're kind of at the end in terms of no time for questions at this point. Mostly we just have a huge amount of praise and appreciation for the wisdom and power of what you had to share with us. But I'll give you another minute before we move to Anne.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you, Odette, for that response. I know that we all have stories that are so similar to share, and we need to take time to reflect on all of the amazing things that we've all accomplished, because we did it in the time of crisis and didn't have time to pause and celebrate. And even in the midst of over 500,000 deaths, we have all things that we can celebrate, and all of the lives. I love celebrating the lives that we've saved. Instead of focusing on what we've lost, what have we gained and who have we saved? And what danger did we avert? So those are all great points to focus on and make sure that we appreciate the silver linings. So thank you.
Thank you, Gerlinda, Odette. And thank you to all of our speakers and respondents. I got some nice notes from Kevin Fickenshire, who was frustrated with the technology, and I'm so sorry. We'll give Kevin more opportunities in the future. Obviously, Kevin is responsible for the program committee for the foundation on the board, and on which Gerlinda is one of our members, in fact, from the alumni network, and we're just thrilled with that. The speakers, I was so touched with them all, and I appreciate your willingness to step up. We will be continuing this every year, and so I've encouraged CEF5 to start thinking about getting into the bidding for opportunities, because we have a lot of stories to tell. We need more of those. And so to give us a little wrap up, I'd like to turn it over to our Chief Executive Officer, Ann McCune.
Thanks. Well, we had a wonderful group today, and the chat was really flowing, and I hope this was as meaningful to you as it was to me. We're sorry that Kevin couldn't join us, and hope that he'll be able to join us later. You should all know, it's his 70th birthday today. So if you know Kevin, and we're going to have breakout rooms when we have our cocktails, make sure that you say happy birthday to him, and we're going to certainly talk about that in our reception. So we've got a little bit of time, but at the top of the hour, you have the opportunity to do some speed networking. If you haven't done it and you go into the lobby, you will see it on the schedule. And all you have to do is click in, and you will be matched with someone for about, I think, 2 to 3 minutes. It's a good way to meet a lot of people in a short period of time. And then at half past the hour, which would be at 5:30 Central, 6:30 Eastern, 3:30 Pacific, we will be in the Carol Emmott room. We'll be hosting our year-end reception. And we're going to sort of talk about a few highlights, and then Gail Capozzolo and her daughter Meredith are going to, everybody's received a recipe to create a boozy cocktail. Encourage you, if you want to make that exact cocktail, please do. I have already, it is in my refrigerator. And or bring something together, because we're going to toast an amazing year behind us and an amazing year ahead. And would love to have you join us again for the reception at 5:30 Central, 3:30 Pacific, 6:30 Eastern. So if you want to head on out, take a little break and come back for networking, and then to the reception, we look forward to seeing you. And thanks again to Doug for fabulous facilitation, Christine for setting the tone, and for our amazing speakers and responders. We are so blessed. See you later, everyone.